Good evening, everybody. Now, we should thank you all for coming. We have a massive crowd. We were going to go with some other venue, but we're glad we came here now because we wouldn't fit you in. So we're gathered here for a couple of things, I suppose. The number one is John, over the last while, has diligently done an audiobook of the history of Bandon Co-op. So we're doing that. John's giving us a brief history of Bandon Co-op, and after that we'll have Tim Crowley of the Michael Collins Centre in Clon. He'll give us a brief history of farming and Bandon, and maybe not Bandon Co-op, but the Bandon town and what went on here over the last 100 years. And Ty Crowley, Dr. John's son, he's going to present some books to the oncoming Shonkas in Bandon. So we'll get proceedings underway because we have a lot to do. John, thank you.
Thank you, Vincent, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. A particular welcome to the Crowley family. I suppose, look, a night like this must be a night that's tinged with sadness, given that your dad passed away earlier on this year. But it must also be a night of pride of his accomplishments, and the fact that tonight we were able to give one of his works access to a much wider audience. This is by no means the full amount of Dr. John's life, and we're not pretending that it is. To do that would take a week, let alone a night. But for the purposes of tonight, it's his book, A History of Bandon Co-op, that we're concentrating on. Now, credit to George Bickley, who came up with this idea the first day. And then when this night came about and I was asked to give a kind of a synopsis of the book, I have to say it was a task that I found very difficult, which you might find a bit unusual given the fact that I've spent 40 years in the place, or maybe it was because of that I found it very difficult, because I found myself getting bogged down in detail, and again, it'll be here till next week at the rate I was going. So look, what I've tried to do, I'm trying to give you a feel or a gist for it. I'll concentrate on some high points, and my apologies if I miss out on some things that some of you there feel are high points, because many of you know the history of it as well, if not better than I do. So I'm going to start by trying to give you a feel for the book, and to do that I'm going to ask you to take yourself out to a hill out. It's called locally Unpekeen, but it's at the confluence of four townlands: Moneens, Castlemore, Castlebeg and Castlecommons. And if you look from there to the north, to the east and to the west, there's an absolutely unsurpassable panoramic view out in front of you. But if you look a bit closer, there's actually quite a bit more to see than that lovely scenic view. You see relics of our past, you see evidence of the present, and you see hints of the future technology that has changed our society and our community over the years. But if you look back again at the panorama and you look closely, you see the remains of the old branch at Mulbrack Creamery. You can see the old railway crossing, which was at White's Gates, and the old telegram poles which lined those railway tracks. And they were called telegram poles because those lines transmitted telegrams from one railway station to the other. You see the current power lines and telephone lines as they crisscross our fields, and you can see away to the northwest the graceful windmills as they're generating electricity. And behind your back you have the mobile phone masts and the now practically redundant two-way radio masts. And if your eyesight was good enough, you would see the new fibre optic cables that are starting to go out across the country. So you've a remarkable blend of past and present. So on the one hand, so if you look back again at the rural panorama, you're looking at fields from which countless generations of us have made a living, either directly or indirectly, from what grows on those fields or what grows under them. So you have two contradictory views. You have one that's never, well, contradictory is the wrong word, I suppose two different views. One that's never changing, and one that's ever changing and ever evolving. And Dr. John, in his book, has captured I suppose you could call it a snapshot, or maybe more accurately, a little video clip of that process of evolution. And it kind of covers the 20th century, and it obviously covers the development of Bandon Co-op. So it's more than 20 years since we first talked about writing a book on Bandon Co-op. And it was published here in the same month in 2010. It's a deceptively simple book, is how I describe it. And what I mean by that is it imparts more historical information in one of his elegantly crafted paragraphs than can be gleaned in many chapters in much more historical tomes. Sorry, I must apologize. I've gone a bit out of practice with these technical stuff. So this photograph here is actually of that night back in 2010 at launch. You see our former chairman, Dermot O'Leary. I think I see you down at the bottom there, Dermot. And you have Dr. John Crowley, next to our special guest on the night, Penny Dunnigan, who was a grandson of Dennis Hennessy, who was the first chairperson. And next to him, you have Gus O'Brien. So, no. How do I play this? Just click again. Oh, thank you.
Forward. Narrated by Tig Crowley, eldest son of Dr. John Crowley. At the centenary celebration dinner of Bandon Co-op in November 2003, there was a widespread view that a history of the co-op was overdue, and following some subsequent discussion with the chief executive, Mr. Gus O'Brien, and with others, I agreed to undertake the task. Perhaps I underestimated what was entailed, and progress was slow in those early years because of the demands arising from my family circumstances at that period. I now wish to acknowledge the patience and understanding of all concerned until I was in a position to devote a concerted effort to the matter from the beginning of 2008. In compiling a history that deals with neighbours and personal friends at committee, management and staff level, I have endeavoured to be fair and impartial, but if anyone is unhappy with what I have written, I am asking for their understanding. Throughout, I have written from a position of great respect and appreciation for those involved and for what they achieved together. At this junction, I am grateful to Providence for the health and strength that enabled me to complete the task during the years of my retirement. I am proud to be associated with a production that records the contributions to the common good of the many past and present. For those of the younger generation and future generations, I hope this book will remind them of their traditions and of what was achieved by their ancestors through mutual cooperation. In more homely terms, it shows what can be achieved by pulling together, and an old Gaelic proverb contains the same message. Sca chéile a waran na daoine. John P. Crowley, March 2010.
So, thank you, Tig, for reading out those very elegant words of your dad. I'm going to move on to another paragraph because in those first two chapters, Dr. John sketches out a great pin picture of what life was like, both from a cultural, from a political and an economic point of view in Bandon town and its environs. The next paragraph is how Dr. John describes the land war.
Forward.
Oh.
Narrated by Tig Crowley.
Okay. The land war, perhaps the most extraordinary social revolution throughout Irish history, undermined the centuries-old system of landlordism and transferred the ownership of the land of Ireland within a period of about 30 years. Some of its other effects were just as profound. It highlighted what could be achieved by parliamentary methods backed by local mass demonstrations. Furthermore, the process identified families and individuals with leadership qualities who would influence matters both at local and national levels in the eventful decades ahead. On the other hand, some sociologists claim that the struggle for land ownership at that time explains in part the strength of the attachment to land that has been a feature of rural life in Ireland until recent times. This in turn may explain the disparity between land values and the economic return from land that has prevailed throughout most of the intervening years. Okay, so there, Dr. John is setting out the background really of how we moved from tenant farmers into people who own their own land. And following on from that, you have the setting up and this widespread spreading of the cooperative movement, spearheaded by this man, Horace Plunkett, resulting in Bandon, in this gentleman, Dr. Dennis Hennessy, gathering together a group of shareholders, and on the 5th of June 1903, they legally inaugurated the society, Bandon Cooperative Agricultural and Dairy Society. They didn't hang about. They leased the premises here in Watergate Street. And if you stand on that street today and look down towards Shannon, that streetscape on the left is unchanged. The co-op premises is on the right, where it started in 1903, and it's there to this day. Now, little did those founders think back in that June day in 1903 that when their successors came to celebrate the 50th anniversary in 1953, that profound and seismic changes would happen to what was the then established world order. The British Empire was at its height, as well as others, but the ensuing 50 years saw empires crumble, some empires grow, and some empires a shadow of their former selves 50 years later. Now, empires may grow and empires may crumble, but when the end work of the co-op continued, the cows were milked, the milk went to the creamery, butter was churned throughout all those times. And Dr. John notes that the only reference to those events during that time was the purchase of war bonds in 1914 at the start of the First World War, and then a change to free state bonds in 1923. Now, there is no doubt that the fortunes of the co-op and farming generally benefited from high food prices throughout that time. Even though, on hindsight, the first storm clouds probably were on the horizon in 1920 because the butter price in 1920 was not equal again until 1947. But be that as it may, Crossbarry amalgamated in 1928, but then circumstances changed both nationally and internationally. You had the Wall Street crash of 1929. You had their own economic war in 1932, which in hindsight really was a self-imposed Brexit. But then, as a result of probably injudicious financial planning, a creamery was built in Inniskeen, which is there to this day, or the premises is there to this day. The creamery in Bandon was rebuilt, and without adequate financial planning, and the combination of those circumstances practically brought the co-op to its knees in 1932. And were it not for the steadfastness of its milk suppliers, shareholders and staff, and issuing new shares, many of which were bought by people in Bandon Town, the co-op would not have survived. But survived it did. Built a branch in Benedy in 1936, Kinsale in 1937, in 1940, and purchased Mulbrack in 1945. The fact that this expansion was able to take place so soon after its virtual going out of business is remarkable. The fact that it was able to do so during a period of incredibly outside constraints is even more remarkable, because between the Civil War, the Economic War, which started in 1932 until 1938, rationing due to the Second World War, which actually lasted from 1940 until December 1951. So you practically had a period of 20 years when trading conditions were, to put it mildly, far from ideal. And just to give you some examples, I suppose during the course of going through some of the old records, I came across quite a bit of correspondence from the late 40s and the early 50s. And was it not for some advice I got? I have a load of it here tonight. Now, some of the slides I'm going showing you, you probably can't read, but they really are just for indicative purposes, and I have the originals here in a file if anybody would like to have a look afterwards. But this is the one dated in 1944, and it's in relation to a butter ration. and it sets out a butter ration of 9 ounces per person per week during the winter. Subsequently, that ration went down to 7 ounces, according to correspondence that's there, and again to 14 ounces, and again down to 4 ounces. But not alone were those sorts of food products rationed. Other items were rationed as well. This slide that shows 2 photographs. One of them, really, I just put up for a minute of Gus and Trish, because if you thought the administration of the super levy was a problem, you should have seen what the administration of butter permits in 1944 was like, without native computers, and it was all pen and ink. And they didn't waste paper. And you can see on the back of every envelope, there's a whole list of figures of permits, the amount of butter was used, the amount of butter that wasn't used, and the balance that had to be returned to the department. The one on the right, again, I don't expect you to read it, but as I said, not only were food products rationed, but cement, timber, coal, and petrol are the ones that are referenced in that correspondence. So throughout that period, up to 1951, the co-op had to wrestle with those things. And of course, probably saddest of all for some people, cigarettes were rationed. Now, I wasn't aware that the co-op dealt in cigarettes, but that's just an example of a lot of correspondence that's there dated 1947 and 1948, which is 2 or 3 years after the war, with John Players and Sons in Dublin, either asking for greater rations or complaining that they didn't get sufficiently. And as a matter of interest to the people, even older than myself in the room, it was a feeding shop in Bandon were the wholesalers. And there's a whole series of invoices from that shop to the co-op, listing out cigarette names like John Players and Sweet Afton and Goldflick, which are rather nostalgic from my point of view. So by the time, as I said, the successors to the founding fathers sat down in 1953 at their event in Owenhincha, they had good reason for satisfaction, given what they had survived, and they had reason for optimism heading into the 50s. Now, I just put this photograph up just as a matter of interest, because I just want to draw your attention to that shafting that goes down along the top of the picture. That shafting provided all the motive power to the co-op, whether it was pumps, agitators, the butter turn, whatever. That shaft and turn was driven by a motor, which was driven by electricity from the Shannon scheme at Ardnacrusha. So back then, 100% of the motive power in Watergate Street was 100% green, 100% renewable, and 100% carbon-free. So I just draw your attention again to things changing and things not changing. From then on, it tends to be a little bit difficult to take things either chronologically or whatever way. So what I've decided to do is try to take, we'll say, ideas or initiatives that were taken up in 1950s, and what's remarkable is the number of initiatives that are still relevant today. And one of them was, there was quite a bit of work put into establishing a vegetable processing factory in Bandon, to the extent that £20,000 was put together in shareholders' funds in 1963. And Mr. Google tells me that £20,000 back then is worth £400,000 today, €400,000 today. So it was a serious effort. It didn't come to fruition. And it came up again in the 1980s, following the imposition of super levy, when the Bandon board looked for alternative crops, and they decided on a strategy to import 1,000 tons of onions that the country was importing. Again, it was a technical success, but not a commercial success. But in one of the different ways that objectives were achieved, there was a small peeling project which was taken over by Ian McCauley subsequently, and he now is growing about 1,600 tons of onions and supplying about 30 tons of peeled onions a week to the processing trade. So in a roundabout way, that objective was achieved. And it was similarly in the 50s, there was quite a bit of discussions within and between co-ops on the establishment of a bacon factory here in West Cork Summer. Those discussions didn't come to anything. Again, in the 1980s, there was a lot of work within Bandon on a bacon factory. And finally, it was our colleagues in Barryroe who, in conjunction with Staunton's, built a plant just outside Timoleague. And it's totally owned by Barryroe now. and it's a fine facility. So again, an idea that commenced back in the 1950s came to fruition in a different way than was planned in the 1990s. You find that, initiatives that started in are just as relevant today. And there are a number of them. You see the first mention of grassland management, and of course that continues on today with grass budgeting and grass measuring. And of particular interest, I suppose, to Dr. John is cattle breeding. The first department facility was established in Dara in 1947, and SWCBS, Southwestern Cattle Breeding Society, was set up in 1957, of which Dr. John was subsequently manager of. And back at that time, human health was really, TB was a plague of humans and animals alike. So the first, from a technical point of view, the creamery had to start pasteurizing scheme, and the co-op's involvement in animal health began with the bovine TB eradication scheme. And this is just correspondence showing the co-op ordering brass tags, which, as far as I can see, is the first time that cattle were tagged in Ireland. Little did they know what was in front of them. Of course, that involvement continued. This is just an example of the pre-intensive brucellosis scheme, which was the 1970s. Again, brucellosis was a very serious health problem in some farms. And levels went from 28% in 1975 back down to 3% as a result of co-ops testing. And again, Dr. Johns was very much involved in coordinating that. The first mention of a milk factory in Bandon is in the early 60s. And eventually discussions were concluded with Express Dairies in 1966. And what you see in front of you is a bill of quantities for the proposed factory in Bandon, County Cork by Carberry Milk Products, and it's dated May 1966. Now, we have 3 Swiss volumes in our possession, which list out every nut and bolt of that factory that was subsequently built in Bandon. This photograph shows you on the top left the construction. Bottom left is a picture that I took myself from Shanaway, as far as I can remember, across the river. And the other photograph is a more modern one, I think, in the early 2000s. And of course, Carberry then went on subsequently to be bought out by the co-ops in 1992. I mentioned technological change. And of course, as I said, it didn't stop. Now, there was a way of life which had been the case for 60, 70 years since co-ops were founded. And that was washing churns, going to the creamery, coming home from the creamery, feeding skimmed milk to calves. Now, the picture that you saw in the previous slide, if I can get back to it, was actually of my mother washing churns. I think washing the churns was usually the woman's job. And thanks be to God, I think that photograph was taken. It must have been in the month of August, because the whitewashing looks kind of fresh. And the whitewashing was always our job for the summer. And I can tell you, it was a job we detested above every other evil, that's for sure. But those sorts of scenes, this is Bill Dempsey from Ballymountain with the horse. And those of a discerning eye can see his creamery passbook in his top pocket. The other photograph is of a very youthful Stephen Jordan with his Canadian cousin, and his sister Fiona emptying out the skim milk in the background. Now, when we were publishing the initial book back in the time, I suppose we asked several times for any people who had any photographs, to let us copy them or whatever. And I would repeat that now, because that was a way of life which was a feature of every farm throughout our parish, throughout the country really, 7 days a week, not 52 weeks a year, because the creameries didn't work every day during the winter time. But it was a way of life that, with the onset of refrigerated ex-farm collection, changed forever. It was replaced by this type of bulk milk collection. Now, in Gus's piece in the book, he speaks about us having to reinvent ourselves. And it was this is an example of this reinvention, because we went from milk being delivered to milk being collected, and really the focus of the co-op changed to being one on transport. And here you have Anthony Hart in 1970, John Twohig in 1980, and now we have a mixture of photographs showing how that technology of both the transport and the tractor units had changed over the years. And on the top left, you have a photograph of John Twohig with his, is it 1947 Dodge, John? I can't quite remember. John is down there somewhere anyway. But John has looked after our transport for over 50 years, and also his brother Barry, and more recent times Owen. And I can certainly say, throughout those times, whether it was snowstorms or floods or any other sort of an occasion, John was always there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So John, I think you deserve a round of applause for that, because you still have the interest. So look, again, on the subject of reinvention, this is a photograph, or a mixture of photographs of Watergate Street. The top right is an aerial photograph taken in 1983. The bottom left is a photograph I took myself of the last day of platform intake in June 1984. So the first day of milk that was taken in that site would have been in October 1903. So it was 81 years later when it finished. So again, like for my generation, it was a familiar sight at every crossroads, because it just shows you the weighing pen, the weighing scales. That's Con Callan, who was there on the platform that day, God rest him, and the sample of bottles which are there behind him. Just above that, you have a photograph of, I spoke about reinventing. I suppose we started packing butter into different packs, and that was the mini pack machine. Bottom right, you have the new separator, which was put in 1990. So where Ms. Cronin started making butter in 1910, the business of butter is still transacted, but it's much, much different. And flavoured butter now is a very important part of the business, and making specialty packs has equally become, I suppose, a niche activity of the co-op. So it's just an aerial photograph of the Watergate Street site yesterday. So the 70s saw a number of developments. I suppose I was talking about reinvention. I suppose this is probably invention or innovation. But other co-ops had gone into trading long before Bandon did. And Bandon started trading in fertiliser in the mid-70s. Purchased a site in Watergate Street, which was the old brewery. It was where Beamish Stout was brewed for the first time, as well as the soft drink Little Nora. And then in 1978, probably the most significant purchase was of the 26-acre site in Kilbroken, along with 22,000 square feet of covered area. And this really was a platform for development of the co-op for many years afterwards, and it still is. This collection of photographs, grain drying was introduced in 1979, grain intake the year before that. And these photographs just give you a kind of a snapshot of the grain intake over the years. Now, I suppose I also included here a photograph of Henry Goods just for completeness, because Henry Goods was purchased in 2013. It's a very fine facility, and I suppose it's only fair to pay tribute to the good family of Kinsale, who for a number of generations had put together a very fine business. They were very good employers, and they had a very loyal customer base, but they were more than builders, victims of the economic crash at the end of the first decade of the 21st century. I think it has been to the benefit of shareholders, farmers, and staff alike that fine facility came into the possession of Bandon Co-op at that time. That photograph was of the first day we took in grain in the Tuesday 2013. Dr. John then describes, or he picks bits out of the minutes where we got involved in retail. And it started in Kinsale in 1990. There's two pictures of events held down there, an aerial photograph. That's the building of Inniskeen in 1997. Inniskeen, when it was completed in 1997, and Inniskeen after its more recent development. Bandon, the bottom left is of a kind of a sad-looking picture, I have to say now, of the initial retail store in Bandon, which Michael O'Driscoll, I think you might remember. Was that 1992, I'd be guessing, or thereabouts? Just above it, then you see the site where the new shop was being built, and on the right-hand side is a Kubita shop, and down below that then is a photograph I took myself sometime in Christmas, I would guess maybe 2003 or 4. So look, that's a very brief run through of the significant developments in Bandon Co-op. There's a lot more in the book, but you have to listen to it. There's an awful lot on rules. There's quite a lot on the process of amalgamation. I have one chapter left, not one chapter, one paragraph left, which I would like to play. But before that, I just want to thank Michelle Lynch for helping me so much with this presentation and everybody in the office. Again, I think I must thank Derbickly for it was his idea in the first place. Can I play this paragraph?
Throughout its history, the Committee of Bandon Co-op has comprised individuals of different religious, political, political and social class. Yet, in working together in mutual harmony towards a common goal, they have grown to know, understand and respect their different cultural backgrounds and traditions. In this way, the Co-op has been a major unifying influence in building the community spirit and in promoting the climate of tolerance and ecumenism that prevails today. In summary then, the story of Bandon Co-op is a many-sided story, a success story that deserves to be recorded. Everyone who has played a part in building the Co-op to what it is today, whether as a chairperson, committee member, shareholder, management, staff member, customer or supplier, should be proud of their part in that success. And in handing on the Co-op to future generations, they are entrusting them with a priceless treasure.
So that's a very significant paragraph for what it says, but I think it's an equally significant paragraph for what it implies. And to explain what I mean by that, I'm going to go back to the 1920s, back to the struggle for independence. And while it may sound somber, I have a reason for it, but I'm going to go back to the 1st of February 1920, when Tom Bradfield, who lived in Knockbacool, the same townland I was born in myself, was taken from his house by Tom Barry and a number of men, and his body was found, shot dead, in a townland of Derry. 2 weeks later, two brothers, James and Timothy Coffey, were taken from their house, and their bodies were found in another neighbouring townland in Kilrush. The following April, April 22 now, between Killowen, Castletown, Moray and Dunmanba, 15 people were shot. The following December, Sean Hales was shot on the 7th of December, and Dick Barrett was executed the following day. Now, many others were shot during that period of time. I'm picking out people, I suppose, that I knew and that I have some connection with, and I'm conscious of the fact that it could be relations of many, if not all, of those people in this room at the moment. There were very difficult times, and every part of our community suffered. But our local Protestant population suffered in a way that was not recognised or acknowledged until recently. Different labels were used: informer, murderer, treason, execution, but none of these labels lessened the anguish or the heartache of the families that were left behind, or anger for that matter. And yet, notwithstanding, people from different religions, as Dr. Johns described, different political sides, pro-treaty and anti-treaty, sat together for the benefit of Bandon Co-op and the community. I'm reminded of a speech that Martin Luther King gave in Washington in the early 1960s, and it was known as his "I Have a Dream" speech. And in his dream was that the families of former slaves and the families of former slave owners could walk together hand in hand with Jew and Gentile, black and white, Catholic and Protestant, and together sing that great song of freedom, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. Dr. John, in his book, has showed us how the political freedom we achieved. He shows us how we used our economic freedom, but he also implies another freedom, and that freedom is a fear of each other. And maybe that freedom is at least as valuable as all the others. I think I have to give great thanks to Dr. John and his family for this great job of work, because it will stand for many years. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, John. It was wonderful. You've been doing fantastic work. Tim, do you want to start your presentation there? We keep things rolling. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tim Crowley. Now, I'm not used to having two screens when we do talks, so unfortunately the one over here on this side is not going to work for the people there. Now, if you want to twist your chairs around, can you actually see the screen from over there? I'll leave it totally up to the people here at the front. Might have a bit of a problem, but if you want to twist around a bit, or even come this way a little bit, I'll leave it totally up to yourselves. Yeah, there's a few chairs here in front, a good point as well if people want to switch. Now, folks, I was a dairy farmer up to about 6 years ago. Dolores, who's sitting down there, my wife and myself, we milk 60 cows. And we have 4 children, 3 girls and a boy, and they all went to college and did very well, thankfully. And we could see the writing on the wall 6 years ago that none of them were going to take on the responsibility of running a dairy farm. And we leased the land. So I do a big appreciation for dairy farmers, co-ops, rural businesses, rural people, farming people, farming folk are very industrious, practical. They can be adaptable, change with changing circumstances, and even the children, I think, of farmers and farmers' wives, any of them I've come across, they're not afraid of hard work. And I suppose that has come through, I think, in John's presentation there about the way the co-op has adapted over the years and all of that. Now, when I was asked to say a few words here this evening, I was kind of scratching my head wondering what I was going to talk about. And I've come up with a kind of a mixed grill of a presentation. So we're going to, there's some great history here in the room tonight, ancestors of some of the people that are here. So we might mention a bit about that. I never fail to take an opportunity to talk about Michael Collins, so we'll be talking a bit about him and his connections with Bandon. And then I'm going to put on, look into the crystal ball, and I was kind of thinking there earlier if Dr. John, who passed away unfortunately earlier on this year, he wrote this book that we're talking about tonight 14 years ago. Supposing he came back in 35 years' time again, 50 years after the first book came out, and wrote the history of the following 50 years. What would that be like for farming and for the co-op? So I'm going to speculate a little bit, and you'll have to humour me there later on. And we might look at a few of the challenges, a few of the opportunities, and you probably won't be any the wiser at the end of it, but it's just a little bit of a mental exercise that we might go through at the end of this as well. Now, just to let you know, for those who have never heard of our museum or whatever and what we do, just a few quick slides. We set up the museum 25 years ago, the Michael Collins Centre. We're diversifying, if you like, on the dairy farm. We're between Clonakilty and Timoleague, and we didn't draw any grants. We just went along ourselves and built it up over a couple of years on a greenfield site on our farm. And what we decided to do was build a museum in the style of a typical small farmer's place from the time Michael Collins was a child. So that's the design there with the galvanized roofs and so on. And you know, when you look around today, a lot of new houses are being built with galvanized roofs and the sides of the walls and so on. So, you know, I think we were ahead of our time when we were doing that. Now, among the outdoor exhibits at the museum, we have a full recreation of the ambush site at Béarn-le-Blas with the vehicles that were Michael Collins' convoy the evening he was killed. And we also have an execution yard, and we have great fun there with school groups when they come to visit the museum. We go through a presentation there outside about 1916 executions and the Civil War executions and so on. And it often happens at the end that the school children come up, and it's pretty bleak history, all of this. And they say, "Can I be the prisoner?" And one of them get up and stand by the post, and the rest of them then line up as the firing squad. So you can't beat the imagination of children. Now, inside then we do presentations. We call it a Michael Collins show at this stage because we use about 40 slides to go through the whole story of Michael Collins, and we do it in a West Cork storytelling style. So usually myself, and we kind of pull the visitor into the story with a bit of emotion and get a bit cranky in the middle of it and all of that. Now, we've had great fun over the years at the museum because with the outdoor execution site that we've created, films have been made. I don't know whether you remember there a few years ago, there was a film broadcast on RT called Brigade. It was just before the centenary of the War of Independence. So this was a recreation of the Kilmichael ambush by the crew that time. And that's some of the damage after Kilmichael with the auxiliaries and all of that. So we had great fun with pyrotechnics. There was grenades going off and shots being fired. We had a problem with one of the neighbours because his cattle went through the electric fence, but other than that, there wasn't any more damage done than that. But I was like a child back again, seeing all the guns and all the stuff that was used by the crew. Now, as part of what we do at the museum, we go out on the road with visitors as well to Kilmichael, Béal-na-Bláth, a lot of the ambush sites, and sometimes our visitors come to the museum and we go out on the road with them afterwards. So it's a kind of an unusual thing for a dairy farmer and his wife to get involved in, but we're 25 years at this now, at that stage. Now, folks, we have Ty Crowley and his brother here this evening, and Vincent O'Donovan, and they'd be cousins. I've something in common with those lads because their grandfathers and my grandfather were active in 1916. And there was a whole series of marches here in West Cork on Easter Sunday 1916. There was one that came through Bandon of volunteers, and they were heading on for Macroom. There was another one came from North Atlantic Hilty, a place called Lyre, and went on to Inchigeela, and there were some other marches as well. The reason, of course, those volunteers were to go to pick up some of the rifles that were coming in off the Odd, organised by Roger Casement from Germany. But of course, that ship was intercepted by the British, and the guns never came in. If they had, well, then the Easter Rebellion would not have been concentrated in Dublin. There could have been a big front opened up here in the south as well, but that didn't happen. But a lot of those volunteers, they went home without firing a shot, basically, here in West Cork, but they were arrested over the following couple of weeks. And just to point out some of the people involved within our families, in that photograph there, you can see on the left, Ty Crowley's grandfather, Sean O'Donovan, and this would be Vincent O'Donovan's grandfather, Peter O'Donovan here. So the two of those ended up, they were part of the Lyre Company, they were ended up being arrested, and they ended up afterwards in a place called Frongach in Wales with Michael Collins and a lot of other people who become very prominent afterwards. Now with them that time was my grandfather, Tim Crowley, who's pictured there on the top, and underneath his brother, John. So there were two sets of brothers, so we've that kind of a bit in common there, that little bit of history. Now, of course, Ty Crowley has some other amazing history as well in his background because there on the left you can see Harry Boland, great friend of Michael Collins. The two men would divide over the treaty back in the Civil War times. But Ty Crowley's grandmother was Kathleen Boland, the sister of Harry Boland. So there's some connection there for Ty. And of course, the man on the right then would be Sean T. O'Kelly, who would later be a president of Ireland. I think he was the second president of Ireland. So there's just tremendous history here in the room tonight. And I know, as been pointed out by John, there's a lot of other stories. If we handed around the mic, I'm sure that people could tell as well. Now, there's Michael Collins and Harry Boland, and of course, they were great friends at one time. They also happened to fall in love with the same woman, of course, Kitty Kiernan, and of course, both men would die in the Civil War within 3 weeks of each other, fighting on opposite sides. So one of the great stories of history, and we've got some strong connections here in the room tonight here to all of that. Now, folks, Bandon, of course, has seen a lot of changes over the decades, which is covered by the history written by Dr. John Crowley. And of course, it was a strong military town at one stage. And up here in Allen Square, there near the Shambles, that's where the old military barracks stood. And you can see the amount of equipment that was there at the time during the War of Independence by the British. And then, of course, so many things happened around here during the War of Independence, and John has kind of touched on it there earlier as well. This is up in Allen Square again, a funeral of one of the British officers killed by the IRA during the War of Independence, up on top of a Crosley tender, on top of a lorry with the Union Jack on top, heading for the railway station, I presume to be shipped back to England. And John was talking there earlier about Dr. Hennessy, who was with the founding chairman of Bandon Co-op. He's pictured there on the left. But I don't know whether any of you know or not, but his brother, actually, Thomas Hennessy, was shot by the British down in Crosshaven in March 1921. And that Dr. Hennessy's first cousin was Father John O'Callaghan, who was shot by the British above in Cork City on May 15th, 1921. So there's some history connected to the founding chairman of Bandon Co-op and the War of Independence. Big losses and big tragedy in his family. Now, there was, in October of 1920, here in Bandon, the British forces carried out some reprisals. They burned down a lot of houses along South Main Street and down towards Bridge Street there, Hickey's and so on. And that was a reprisal for an incident that happened earlier on that day at Turin. And funnily enough, Vincent O'Donovan is here, the chairman tonight. That's his property on the left. And the old road, the main road today goes up this way, but the old road went in there quite tight to the stone buildings in front of Vincent O'Donovan's yard today. Now, I think it was Robert's family were living there at the time. And Tom Barry, I think Charlie Hurley was involved as well. They set up an ambush there for the British, and there was 2 lorries of Essex Regiment came along. They were attacked by the flying column. 1 lorry managed to get away, but they managed to ambush the second one. And there was 3 British officers died as a result of that incident. So again, we're tying in all the history here in the room again with this, because the British came along afterwards, and it was known as the sack of Bandon. They burned houses, and some of the people had to leave. There's an old lady actually being taken out by some other lady from a house that had been damaged or whatever at the time. And some of these photographs actually come from books that came up by the late Paddy Connolly, by the way. So I need to give him credit for his work here as well tonight. And you can see there's furniture and so on being taken away after some of the houses were being burned. And some of this was being taken away because they were expecting houses to be burned, and they were saving the furniture from destruction. That gives you an idea then of some of the destruction around Bandon here during that time. And then, of course, as you know, the Maid of Erin is out at the edge of the Dumanway Road today. Originally, it was down here at the bridge, and one of the things the British did at the time is they tied a rope onto the Maid of Erin, onto the pillar, back of an armoured car or lorry, and pulled it down, and you could see the destruction there during that time as well. Now, we get into the man himself, Michael Collins, and the connections with Bandon. The day that Michael Collins was shot, and I'll get my little pointer here, and just to let you know where he was going that day, he started off that morning in Cork City. They went on through Coachford, the convoy, onto Macroom, and then they wanted to go from Macroom to Bandon. The normal route would take you through Crookstown, but all the bridges were blown up on that road. So they asked the man in Macroom called Tim Kelleher, the grandfather of the people who run Kelleher's Ford dealership in Macroom today. He was a hackney driver back then, and he took the Collins convoy through Kilmurray onto Bernablaw, and they were heading for Bandon. And of course, Michael Collins' convoy was spotted going through Bernablaw in the morning, and then he would be ambushed on the return journey in the evening. But anyway, that morning, the Collins convoy came into Bandon. And one of the first places they called to was the Devonshire Arms up in what's the name of the hill again? Kilbrogan, that's the one, and that's what it looked like back then. Now, of course, there's an apartment complex there today, and some people get confused. They think that's actually the original Devonshire Arms, but of course it's not. The Orchid Ballroom and so on was on that site in between. Did anyone ever hear that there was 2 bedrooms up in the Devonshire Arms haunted? What's the story there? Somebody told me one time that there was two rooms couldn't be used in the hotel because they were haunted. Well, I'd be talking to someone. If you can come up and tell me that story there afterwards, if somebody has the full details of it. Yeah. So that must be true. So yeah, I heard. So that they were the two haunted rooms up there on the left. So now, of course, Michael Collins went in there in the morning that he was shot, and later in 1922, the armoured car that was in his convoy when he was killed, Sliabh Naman, was stolen by anti-treaty lads out of that building as well. So there was a fair bit of history attached to this period with the Devonshire Arms. Now, that day, we know Michael Collins drove out of Bandon, passed through Lord Bandon's estate, because the main road out of Bandon heading west to Clonakilty was blocked at that time. And there is a couple of references to the convoy passing through Lord Bandon's estate, which didn't look like that back then, because it was actually burned during the War of Independence. So it would have been in ruins when Michael Collins passed through that morning. And of course, the man responsible for the destruction of Lord Bandon's mansion during the War of Independence was the great friend of Michael Collins, Sean Hales. It was his the detachment of IRA kidnapped Lord Bandon and burned down his mansion. That was June 1921. Now, of course, I got a great story there 2 years ago from a lady down in Clonakilty at a meeting down there. The morning that Michael Collins was shot, as he was going out to Castle Road in Bandon, there was a crowd of young lads playing hurling on the side of the street. And they had to step in to let Michael Collins' convoy pass. And as Michael Collins' yellow car, the staff car he was travelling past the young lads, one of the boys shouted out, "Hey, look at Michael Collins!" It was too late. The convoy had driven away. But anyway, the convoy went about a half mile out the road, and they had to turn around again and come back. And this time the young fellas were waiting. They were standing on the side of the road with their hurleys over their shoulders like soldiers, saluting Michael Collins as he passed by, and he kept saluting back. Now, I never heard that story until a lady told me the story there a couple of years ago, and that time, because Michael Collins was shot that evening, they got the group of young lads together afterwards for a photograph. There's the photograph, and there's Tom Hagerty with the X in front of him. The lady I met, that was her father we were talking about. He lived up to 1992, actually. So that's a little human story. And of course, Michael Collins loved old people, and he also loved children as well. That was one of his couple of his characteristics. Now, if we were standing out here on the street on the evening of August 22nd, 1922, we might have seen that scene. Because, of course, the last place Michael Collins stopped before Bernablaw was here, the Munster Arms, or as it was at the time, Lee's Hotel. And that's the famous photograph there. You can see him, Emmett Dalton, his officer next to him in the back seat, and Corrie and Quinn. That car, of course, was the yellow Leyland 8. Now, that evening then, we know the convoy came up Kilbrogan Hill. And that's a photograph of Kilbrogan Hill taken from looking from the north, looking down towards the town. And we know that day, Michael Collins' convoy came up the street there, and there was a lady standing on the side of the street, Annie O'Leary was her name, a former girlfriend of Tom Barry, actually. And she had a Kerry Blue dog on a leash. And she told the story afterwards that as Michael Collins' car was passing up Kilbrogan Hill, he put his hand out over the side of the car and he went to the dog and continued on. So one of the last dogs Michael Collins would have seen, other than maybe one or two sheepdogs out near Bernablaw, was the Kerry Blue in Bandon. And why is that significant? Michael Collins was a big fan of the Kerry Blues. And there's a photograph of Michael Collins at the railway station in Cork with his sister, Mary Collins Powell, on the left, and a Kerry Blue dog. Collins bred Kerry Blues, and he gave them to friends as pups. And he did one of his dogs, actually, was called Bandit 332, because that was his own prison number in Sligo jail in 1918. And there was at least one occasion above in Dublin during the height of the War of Independence where Michael Collins would go into the RDS with his dog, Bandit 332, and he would be showing off his dog. And the man standing next to him would be a district inspector of the Royal Irish Constabulary. And here would be Michael Collins standing, chatting about the merits of the Kerry Blue and so on, and that officer would have spent the previous week looking for Michael Collins, and he was actually standing next to him, but he didn't know. So there's a little connection between Bandon and the Kerry Blue dog, which was so important to Michael Collins. Now, folks, another little funny connection. The day that Michael Collins was shot, his convoy was led by a motorcycle scout, Lieutenant Smith, riding a machine like that. It was a Model H Triumph motorbike. And after Bernard Blah, Smith was actually shot in the neck out there. He was the only other man to be wounded, other than Michael Collins in the skirmish out there. And the bike was left over at Bernard Blah up against the ditch. And one of the officers in charge of the anti-treaty ambush party at Bandon that day was Tom Hales, one of the two brothers. And he actually gave the motorbike afterwards to a man called Bruno O'Donoghue. Now, Bruno O'Donoghue was born in 1905 in Corratlock, Bandon. He, for a time, was a co-tester with Bandon Co-op. And how he used to get around? On Lieutenant Smith's motorbike. Unfortunately, that bike has since disappeared. It isn't in any premises belong to Bandon Co-op or anything, is it? It could be worth about €500,000 or something if it was, if it was still around today. But anyway, Bruno O'Donoghue, of course, was afterwards a clerk in Collins Barracks, military barracks in the city there, and he died in 1990. One of his great works, he was also a great historian, was the parish histories and place names of West Cork. And if you have one of them, I saw one on eBay there the other day for €560. That was the asking price. So they're out of print, very, very rare. If you have one, mind them. So there's a kind of a little connection there between the Co-op and the Michael Collins again. And this is a photograph from Dr. John's book, the Committee of Management of Bandon Co-op in 1953. And just to point out, standing there, Tom Hales. One of the anti-treaty people at Bernard Blah, the evening Michael Collins was shot. And of course his brother, well, Tom was outside waiting at the ambush site. His brother, Sean, was inside in this hotel meeting Michael Collins, his great friend and local army commander. Two brothers, opposite sides, just part of the whole tragedy of that period. Now, folks, we'll move away from Michael Collins. That's, again, from one of the Bandon Historical Society journals, Cumanchanicus here in Bandon. It was Almond's Distillery. You'll be talking about Bandon Co-op and the huge premises and so on it has now. Look what was there back in the 1800s. And then there was thousands and thousands of tons of grain being drawn in there by local farmers, and the Almonds whiskey was made there. There was breweries, which have been mentioned here already. Bandon, a hugely industrial town going back in history. These are just some photographs, again, from some of the Bandon journals of Almonds Distillery, located where the farm supply stores is there around that area, and just across from the market, that's where that premises was. It even had its own siding going off the main line of the railway, and I think they called that train the coffee pot. It was kind of an ugly-looking engine enough at the time, but one of the rules of using that engine was a man had to walk in front with a red flag, and you can see him there standing. I think his name might be known as well. And there's the back of that engine going over to Almonds Distillery. And that closed in 1925. There was a couple of reasons for it. One of them was the imposition of the restriction of booze over in the United States at the time. There was some other problems as well, and gradually there was a big stock of whiskey over in the premises close to where the mart is now for about a decade afterwards. But when that distillery was closing at the time because of prohibition and all of that, little did the people there think that whiskey would be made here in West Cork and liquor from milk in later years. And just to mention some of the products made from milk, the Five Farms, cream liqueur, and also Baru vodka, which comes from milk produced in West Cork as well. And we've a great friend down in Butlerstown in Barryrow. Some of you might know Michael O'Brien, and he wrote a great song. If you haven't ever heard it, you should try and listen to it. It's called The Vodka That Came From a Cow, and it had a cure for everything, the way Michael O'Brien has written it. A great song. Now, folks, the way change happens everywhere. An amazing railway station here in Bandon for so long, well over 100 years, and junction and all of that. And then the whole thing closed down in 1961, and that's over near the Cloncool estate here in Bandon, and they're taking up the rails. It's just part of ongoing change. Then, after World War II, or the emergency period, the rural electrification really took off here in Ireland in 1946. And by 1965, 80% of the country had electricity. So these are just a photograph there of the poles being stood by hand. You can see the shovels there on the right, and this other man here in the middle giving instructions. And they say, history always repeats itself. So This, I suppose, it was sold the electricity to the farmers for driving water pumps, milking machines, and all of that, but also to their wives. You had the washing machines and all of that, and you had these special shows, demonstrations going around. That's one of them there, with all the different types of appliances that could be used for electricity. Of course, there were some places that the electricity passed their front door, but they didn't take it for sometimes decades afterwards. They didn't trust it, especially some of the older people at the time. Now, this photograph I took close to my own house the other day. So now you have something similar going on, except now this broadband is being put around, and the fibre optic cables and all of that. So again, all this history keeps repeating itself in different ways. Now, of course, here in Bandon, up around Allen Square, again, there used to be these incredible fairs. These are shots from the Lawrence collection around 1900, late 1890s, 1900. Look at the crowds that were around that time at the fairs, and sheep and cattle and pigs and all of that. And there's another shot in front of the old military barracks there on the right, looking down towards the town. And then, of course, that all changed here in 1957 because the mart opened. And these are just some notices from the newspapers at the time, being officially opened by Senator Sean Moylan, who was, of course, a great veteran of the War of Independence from North Cork and all of that as well. Bandon Mart was officially opened by him. And then you can see, these are great photographs from the Southern Star at the time. Some of the people that were there, including a priest, I think, blessing the mart. And some of the people inside in the group looking on. And then there's just a photograph of the ring, the first day of the sale. Again, that's gone back to 1957. Again, change. No, we just said I'd throw that in. It's Macklins are still operating here more to the electrical side of cars and all of that, but they had the garage. Where was Macklin's garage again? Over near where the Garda station is now, is it? Weir Street, yeah. So you can see there, look what they were still doing. The tractor trailers made to size, including tipping trailers, complete locked and cut to size for farm carts. So there was still obviously horses being used a fair bit at the time. I was born 29th of October 62, so that was just a few weeks afterwards, and they were wishing their customers a happy Christmas at that particular time. Now, Mockern firm, I suppose, is worth mentioning it here tonight, played a big role back in the decades, educating farmers and their wives and all of that. And that's just a photograph out of one of Paddy Connolly's books again, taken out here in the street. And John Coffey would have mentioned Phelan's there. You can see there's an advertisement for Phelan's there up on the bridge, and it gives you the telephone number and South Main Street, the address there as well. Now, I think Vincent O'Donovan's aunt is here. Did I come across her name? I think one of these ladies. What's her name down there at the bottom? Tess O'Donovan, yeah. Which one is she? Would you recognise her? Third in, yeah. That'd be Tess O'Donovan Vincent's. And so you've Andy O'Leary, we'd know him well. There's Faulkner, O'Callaghan from Ross Carberry, very much involved with the IFA. Anyone else recognise anybody there? Dennis Lehan, yeah. He was originally from Ballymacune and ended up living here just north of Bandon, of course, as well. Willie Santry, a lot of people there that people might know. Then, of course, great industry at one time, sugar beet. Did you know that they were talking of putting up a sugar beet factory in Bandon one time? I came across something in the 1930s, actually. They were talking about setting up a sugar beet factory. And, of course, in the early days, the farmers used to have to pike the beet from carts and tractor trailers into the wagons and the railway stations. And there must have been hundreds of thousands of tons of beet went through Bandon railway station from the west, from the likes of Barryrobe Parish, great area for growing beet, and not to mention the area all around here as well. At one stage, it must have been just an incredible busy spot for beet during that particular season. But unfortunately, the whole thing ended in 2006. And from what I'm reading about it, I think it was in the end a kind of an accounting error, we'll just say that caused the end of the sugar beet industry. Now, as I was saying there at the start, supposing Dr. John came back, God be good to him, in 30 years' time and wanted to write the continuation of the story that he started 14 years ago, well, what might he be coming across as far as the history of farming in the years from now for the next 30 years and so on? Would the brands that are this area so synonymous with still be around, the great Dubliner cheese? And I suppose the best butter in the world, Bandon butter, we have to really praise that. It's always in our house anyway. That's been there, I suppose, over 100 years. Hopefully it will be there in another 50 years or 40 years' time. What about farming? Is it going to continue as it is with technology changing? You could imagine what in 30 years' time, what the robots will be like then. Farmers won't even have to get out of bed. They'll be able to do everything from sitting inside with the laptop and in the bedroom. And then driverless tractors, are they going to be commonplace? Again, the farmer will have to do nothing, sit on the side of the bed and all the ploughing and everything be done for him automatically. And I came across this during the week, a machine developed in the United States that actually goes around the field and picks up the bales and stacks them and the whole lot, and you don't have to do a bit as well. So is this the way things are going to go? Or is climate, the way things we've seen this past spring, the way things happened, is that going to become a bit of a problem as time goes by? Again, I can't answer these questions, I'm just putting them forward. What about stuff like this? They're able to take protein powder out of the air, a company in Scandinavia. Is that going to change things with farming and so on in the decades in front of us? Or what about this? Chinese taking protein out of coal. Are there going to be Chinese people in 10 years' time eating yogurt made of protein from coal? With AI and all technology, who knows what's going to happen? But it's going to be more than interesting, and hopefully we'll live to see some of this going on. What about these people? Replacing meat, becoming very prominent in the United States, even though their shares haven't been going too well recently from what I've been gathering about it. Are farmers going to go away a little bit from food production and into energy production? Is that going to be that? There's local solar farms starting up here as we speak at the moment. More windmills. Are farmers going to be paid to let places grow wild and be given biodiversity credits? Lord Dunsany up in County Westmeath did a deal recently there with the technology company. They're going to pay him so much every year to leave his land go wild. Is that something that's going to creep in? Are farmers going to be paid for storing carbon in trees, soil, grass, hedgerows and all of that? There will probably be money to be made out of that as time goes on, opportunities if the farmers can get their fair share. I suppose all we can know, looking into the past and going through Dr. John's book, is that farmers work well when they're working together within the cooperative movement, within their representative organizations and all of that. If farmers stay on their own, they're not going to survive, but when they work together as a team, they can move mountains, and you've seen that there with the history of Bandon Co-op, what can be achieved over well over 100 years. And I would just want to finish. We'll go back to Michael Collins briefly. There's a pub over where close to where he was born called the Four Alls at Sam's Cross, and I always like it's called the Four Alls, and you can see where the name comes from. It's an old medieval rhyme. The king rules all, the soldier fights for all, the bishop prays for all, and the farmer pays for all. So it's so true. And I hope our politicians into the future and our government will realise how important farming is to rural Ireland. It's the backbone. It keeps so many people in employment and all of that, and it has to be supported up to the hilt right into the future. Congratulations to John Coffey on his audio book, and belated congratulations to Dr. John on creating the book from which the audio book has been taken. As John Coffey said, it'll be there right up into the future. And make sure when you're driving around in your tractors to put it up on the earphones or whatever system you're using. And I know there's copies of the book around here tonight as well if people want to take them home. All right. Pleasure, folks, talking tonight, and thanks for the opportunity, folks. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Tim for a fantastic presentation. He's most professional and thorough. Wonderful. John forgot to give us a very important chapter of the Bandon Co-op, so he wants a quick few words there to bring us through that. Thank you.
And in the day that I was retiring in Bandon, there was a function in the boardroom, and I had the very bad misfortune to forget to thank my wife. And I've nearly made as bad a mistake tonight because I had a paragraph on an acquisition, but I was keeping it to the very end because and that was of course on Bandon Vale, because the Co-op acquired Bandon Vale in 2009, and that alone has been an absolutely splendid company. But we got some great people, and one of those people is down there somewhere. I can't see her at the moment, Eilish Mahan, and of course Eilish is taking over as CEO in Bandon from the 1st of January. And I'm sure we all, congratulations, Eilish, and I'm sure we wish you all the best in that job.
Well, thank you again, John, for that. I know Ty Crowley is going to give us a quick few words on the presentation for Cumann-Shankas. Thank you, Ty.
Yeah, thanks very much, Vincent, and delighted to be here. Very special evening for us. Now, many of you would know that my dad was a great one to encourage the younger generation, so I'm delighted to have the assistance of my niece, Siobhan, who is going to help us to convey some of briefly what we want to impart on behalf of the family. So, Siobhan.
Good evening. My name is Siobhan O'Halloran, and I am a granddaughter of Dr. John Crowley. There are a few aspects I would like to convey on behalf of our family. Writing a history of Bandon Co-op meant a great deal to my granddad. It represents a confluence of interests, aspects of his life, and meant so much to him. My granddad had a great interest in and knowledge of history. He was particularly interested in the land reforms that took place in Ireland during the later decades of the 1800s. Land reform paved the way for progressive economic and social movements, including the cooperative movement founded by Horace Plunkett. The establishment of Bandon Co-op in 1903 aligned with this community-led progress that was of such interest to my granddad. The other reason that my granddad was drawn to the history of Bandon Co-op is because it is essentially a history of progress among the farming community here in West Cork and centred here in Bandon. My granddad devoted his professional career to the advancement of farming in West Cork through his work at SWCVS, a cooperative which was owned by West Cork Co-ops. Writing a history of Bandon Co-op was the perfect retirement project for my granddad. He invested much research and work into producing that history, and we'd be delighted to see that history now available in an audio format. In his acknowledgements, my granddad wanted to thank two family members, my aunt, Roisin, who did the proofreading of the entire text, and my mother, Anne, who supported my granddad in the word processing. I will conclude by quoting from my granddad's foreword. For those of the younger generation and for future generations, I hope that this book will remind them of the traditions and of what was achieved by their ancestors through their mutual cooperation. An old Gaelic proverb contains the same message. Er ska a chéile a bharan nadini. Thank you. Enjoy listening to my grandfather's history of Bandon Co-op.
Well done, Siobhan. He'd be very proud of you. So that makes my job very easy. Cumann-Shankas na Bandon was a great outlet for my dad's interest in history. So we have here at the front a small collection of his books, which we'd like to present to Cumann-Shankas this evening. So Pat Caniff is here. So we might do that at the end rather than keep you now, but that was part of what we wanted to do. The other things is just to thank the various people who made tonight possible, particularly Bandon Co-op, who are hosting us here this evening. Vincent, who's our cousin, as the chair, Ger Brickley, and Michelle Lynch, who did so much to put it together. And also to congratulate this new CEO. He'd be delighted that there's going to be a woman in charge. Also to thank Tim Crowley for sharing that history. I've collaborated with Tim on many projects. A lot of that history he talked about is on my mother's side of the family. So he talked about my grandfather, my mother's father from Cashaliski in Clonakilty, and that's how I'm related to Vincent. And then he married Kathleen Boland, who was a sister of Harry Boland. The history between Harry Boland and Michael Collins is well documented. But my grandmother Kathleen also left us with a very detailed military history testimony in which she was quite forthright in conveying her views on Michael Collins. So I'll just convey that to you very briefly. You know, most historians would agree that Michael Collins had a fairly large retinue of female admirers, but my grandmother wasn't one of them. So I'll give you what she said. Mick Collins asked me to go to Mountjoy with flowers for Mrs. Llewellyn Davies, who was in prison there, though I don't know for what. I took a bouquet there 3 times for him. He brought them himself to me on a bicycle. It struck me as funny for Mick Collins to be bringing flowers, and I used to joke him about it. Flowers and Mick Collins did not seem to go together. I fancy there must have been some good cause behind it, and that it was not purely gallantry. This is where she expresses her own view now. I must say that, although Mick had no personal appeal to me as a man, he was a Trojan worker and kept everyone up to the mark. He had that quality that everything he would do well. So that was her take on Mick Collins. So the other people we want to thank is Colm Cronin, who can't be here tonight, I think, but he did an excellent work on the production, and also John Coffey, to whom we're so grateful. His voice beautifully epitomizes the same soft accent my dad had. So thank you, John, and enjoy reading the book.
Thanks, Vincent. Thanks, everybody. Jesus, it's an emotional night. I didn't expect it to turn out like this, to be honest with you. It's been so interesting. John, congratulations on your presentation. Could everybody give John a round of applause? You know, I can only equate the work that went into tonight from John to the work that he put into the co-op over 40 years. And as John said, we had a chat, I suppose about 12 months ago or more maybe, about this project. And I suppose, you know, if you were to have somebody read the book and history of Bandon Co-op, you could not really pick a better voice than John Coffey, other than, I suppose, you went every second chapter with Gus O'Brien. But that we couldn't get Gus, he was too busy. But no, I thought was an unbelievable effort, John. Well done. Reading the book again over the last few days, you know, it was interesting that nearly every kind of commercial initiative went down to the wire in the co-op. You know, there was always mad scramble for most projects as you try to get them going, and getting the book up online was no different. There was 100 emails going around, but I am so glad to say that the book is up online and it's available free to everybody to read. And I had the pleasure this evening, I had to go home and clean up a little bit, and I started listening to John Coffey in Bandon, and I was in Blarney before I even knew I was going up the road. And the same coming back down the road, I was listening to the section about the Carberry being founded, and again I left Blarney and I was in Bandon. I was gone past Bandon nearly, listening to the book. So I would encourage all the younger members, I think someone touched on it earlier on, that, you know, you can link phones to tractors, you can link them to cars, and it's such a good way to spend a journey if you can link something like the book up onto the car, because you might never get a chance to do it another time, but it is fantastic as you're traveling. And something we're going to do tomorrow, we've about 5,000 customers in the Bandon area that are on our database, and everybody will get the link to the book tomorrow. So everybody will be able to get access to it. And again, I just want to finish by congratulating John. It's a fantastic effort. Thank you.